Hi, we're back for Unit 4C, the personality disorders, and for this unit we'll be following along in Townsend, Chapter 32, pages 669 through 701. We're not going to get as in-depth as Townsend does into the development of the personality. That's basically all your intro to psychology and your developmental psychology coursework anyway. So we only have 3 objectives. It's only supposed to take about an hour to cover this in class. We'll have some fun with it. The first objective is the main one. We're going to identify and differentiate the clinical features of personality disorders. And for that, personality disorders are rampant in society. You'll find that you can diagnose a lot of people you know, your classmates, your colleagues, your friends, your family, hopefully not your instructors, but we can have some fun with that in class. We're going to discuss the nursing diagnosis for personality disorders and try to apply the nursing process, but what complicates this is that people who have personality disorders don't generally have a lot of insight. They won't come seeking care for it, and it's not something you're likely to see as the primary diagnosis, either psychiatrically or even in a medical facility. You will, however, meet lots and lots of clients throughout your nursing career, no matter where you work, who have personality disorders, and it is helpful to have some information about that so that we can help them and really help ourselves be better equipped to take care of them. So we'll get started. So why don't we start with what a personality is so that we understand what a personality disorder could be. And a personality is the totality of emotional and behavioral characteristics that are particular to a specific person and that remain somewhat stable and predictable over time. This is how we know who this person is, through their personality. The second foundational concept that you should understand in order to get a better understanding of what a personality disorder is that nature and nurture sort of interact to create the personality. And certain inborn temperament traits can predispose people to the various personality disorders, particularly in the context of certain negative early life experiences. Now, when we're talking about the different types of personality disorders, there are 3 basic types, cluster A, B, and C. For our purposes, the weird, the wild, and the worried. So we have our cluster A on the DSM-5. These personality disorders are associated with behaviors that are odd or peculiar, a little bit bizarre. We have paranoid personality disorder. These are the people who think everybody's out to get them. They're not worried about the CIA. It's not a paranoid delusion, but they are mistrustful. We have our schizoid personality disorder. We'll go into all these in a little bit more detail. People who are aloof, indifferent, don't have friends, don't want friends. Schizotypal personality disorder are people who just look like they're going to snap one day and become schizophrenic. They don't decompensate to the extent where they lose all their function the way a schizophrenic patient does, but they have some odd or bizarre behaviors, some magical thinking. That's your cluster A. We have cluster B. These are the wild personality disorders, and these are associated with behaviors that are dramatic or erratic. These are very emotional people, except for antisocial, not so much emotional, but the behaviors that they exhibit are wild. They are off the hook. An antisocial personality, we all know these are our sociopaths. They can look like perfectly normal, charming people, charm the pants off you and manipulate you into doing all kinds of things that they want. But this is also the criminal personality. So sometimes their behavior is so excessive and so self-centered that appears a little bit wild. We have our borderline personality disorders. These are very unstable individuals. Again, we'll talk more about each one individually. But they have some self-harming, superficial suicide gestures. They tend to divide people into good or bad. That's your borderline. But their behavior can be very dramatic, and they can be very needy and draining. Histrionic personality disorder, these are very theatrical, colorful, exaggerated people, and as long as they're getting what they want, they're usually pretty charming too. They can also be a little manipulative. They want a lot of attention. Everything is about getting more attention. And we have our narcissistic people who believe that they're very special and that they deserve special consideration in things. They put their own needs before the needs of others. So that's your cluster B, your wild. Then we have cluster C, our worried personality disorders, and these are our people who have traits that are anxious or fearful as a personality rather than as a disorder. They don't get the heart-pounding panic attacks necessarily. They just look at the world from a very timid sort of perspective. We have our avoidant personality disorders, our shrinking violets, shy people who wish they had friends but just can't seem to go out there on a limb, can't risk anything. We have our dependent personality disorders, and these are people who kind of glom on to other people and need those people to fulfill them personally. And we have our obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And when we talked a little bit about obsessive compulsive disorder as an anxiety disorder, we differentiated it by saying the obsessive compulsive personality is a person who needs to have everything just so. That's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So those are our clusters. So we're going to discuss each personality disorder in a little bit of detail, not too long because we're, trying to keep this brief. But just to give you a feel for what a paranoid personality disorder is like, it's not the same as somebody who has paranoid delusions where they think the CIA is tapping their phone. These are people who just are generally negative about other people's motives. They suspect everyone of having some agenda. They always are looking for the trick. They just have a pervasive, suspicious attitude. So there's a little mnemonic for each one of these personality disorders. I don't want you to memorize them, that's not the point. But just to give you like sort of a feel for what they're like, we're going to talk about this little mnemonic. So for the S here, we have suspect spouse of infidelity. These are the people, their wife goes out dressed fairly nicely and they think, where are you going? Who are you going to see? So for you, we also have unforgiving. And they're unforgiving, they bear grudges. They imagine that everybody's just got the worst motive. So somebody does something to them accidentally and they attribute the most negative motive to that person. S is suspicious of others. We've already sort of covered that. This is a person, if you give them a gift for no reason, they think that you're trying to manipulate them into doing something. They always see the most negative things. Perceives attacks for P. So everything they think, they react quickly. So every time something is said, if there's a misunderstanding, they perceive it as a personal attack. E is enemy or friend. They think that the people that they work with are all enemies unless they declare themselves as loyal friends. But they suspect associates and friends of working with the enemy. Confiding in others is feared. They will not tell any secrets about themselves. They don't give information away. And for the T, we have threats perceived in benign events. So someone forgets their birthday and they see it as a personal insult. So these people are not fun to be around. That's your paranoid personality disorder. Okay, so next we have schizoid personality disorder. Most people will say the word antisocial personality. What they really mean is schizoid. And we'll discuss antisocial personality. Those are the sociopaths. A schizoid personality disorder has behavior traits that characterize this person as isolated by choice. They have few friends or no friends, and they don't want friends. They don't like people. So we use the acronym DISTANT for that. And the D stands for detached. So these are cold, flat, flat affect. They sort of look like they're not interested. Indifferent to criticism or praise. So you can try flattering them or you can try giving them, they don't care. They really don't care what your opinion is. And it's not the same as a narcissist where they feel like you're entitled to their opinion. It's really somebody who's just whatever. They don't like people. So sexual experiences hold little interest for them. And the T stands for tasks done solitarily. These people hate group work. They do best when they work alone. A, absence of close friends. N, neither desires nor enjoys, even in their own families very often, close relationships. So these are people who, even with their brothers and sisters, are very distant most of the time. And the T is for takes pleasure in few activities. So that's your schizoid personality disorder. And a lot of times, this is a person who has been rejected so many times that they just sort of have given up on the human race. Their childhoods can be characterized as bleak, cold, lacking empathy. They lacked nurturing. And at the same time, they maybe were born with a temperament that was disposed to introversion and shyness. So that's your schizoid personality disorder. The next personality disorder we're going to discuss in our cluster A is schizotypal, and these people are noted for being eccentric or odd and unusual in some way, sometimes displaying bizarre affect or behavior. Our acronym is Me Peculiar, which tips you off to that. They sometimes display magical thinking or odd beliefs. For example, they might believe in omens and superstitions and that they have a special connection with somebody, not quite as pronounced as your schizophrenics. They aren't delusional or psychotic to the point where their personality disintegrates. They don't decompensate quite that far. Although under periods of extreme stress, they can become a little bit psychotic, which is why they can be called latent schizophrenics. But their magical thinking is more along the lines of, well, if I send happy, positive thoughts, that person will like me. Less along the lines of, I know if I think this, I'm going to cause an earthquake, which is more of your schizophrenic or psychotic delusion. Experiences, unusual perceptions. Again, it's a matter of degree. It's not quite the hallucinatory experience that a schizophrenic might report, but they might say that they can read auras, or they can they somehow have an out-of-body experience. They're sort of a little kooky or wacky. Paranoid ideation. They believe in conspiracy theories. They might not think that the CIA is listening to them, but they think the CIA is listening to somebody. Eccentric behavior or appearance. Sorry for my typing. Trying to get through it kind of quickly. Eccentric behavior or appearance, these are people who go to Star Trek conventions dressed up as their favorite character, and they think there's nothing wrong walking around like that. So, you might see people with body modifications who might have a little schizotypal personality disorder. And that would not be unusual. Constricted or inappropriate affect. There's just something a little bit off about them, and we're going to talk at the end about differential diagnosis, because some of these traits have some characteristics in common with your autism spectrum disorders, and it could be that one psychiatrist looks at this and says, oh, schizotypal, and another person looks at it and says, that's a little more of a pervasive developmental disorder. But these are just some traits you might see: laughing at things that are serious, or being very serious and formal in situations that are a little bit more lighthearted. Unusual speech patterns. They'll coin phrases, not word salad or clang associations like a schizophrenic again, but they might put some unusual things together to make a new sort of phrase, catchphrase. Lacks close friends. Again, if you start thinking about people you know who might display some of these characteristics, unless they find people who are just like them, they're really not going to form close friendships. Because a lot of people sort of feel awkward around them. And honestly, sometimes the conversation that a schizotypal personality might not be of interest to most people, so it's hard for them to relate to others. Ideas of reference, not the same as a delusion of reference. A schizophrenic person, or a person with a delusional disorder, will think that the person on TV is talking directly to them, Whereas a person with schizotypal personality disorder is more likely to think, I found this penny because my mother in heaven is thinking of me. Now, you'll see people who have traits of schizotypal without a full-blown personality disorder. They'll have one or two odd beliefs. I think most of us have at least one good delusion or idea of reference or some form of magical thinking. It's a matter of degree. When this becomes a pervasive way that this person presents themselves to the world, it becomes a personality disorder. Anxiety in social situations, probably more of an effect than a cause, meaning when you're a little bit weird and you go to school and the kids make fun of you, you learn that social situations aren't always kind. When you experience that rejection over and over again, you can internalize that to some extent without having a whole lot of insight into your behavior, why people might not want to be around as much. So with this, we want to rule out psychotic disorders and pervasive developmental. And we've already mentioned that, there are some traits in common with schizophrenia and there are some traits in common with autism spectrum disorders. And so we want to be really careful. Do they have stereotyped repetitive behaviors? That would be more indicative of an autism spectrum disorder. Do they have more of the decompensatory mechanisms? Do they have delusions? Do they have hallucinations that sort of have exacerbations and remissions? So we want to rule out the psychotic disorders and the pervasive developmental disorders. But that's your schizotypal personality disorder. We're moving on to the cluster B personality disorders. These are the wild disorders, so named because the behaviors that individuals exhibit with these personality disorders are so extreme and exaggerated and so far outside of our cultural norms that they tend to really call attention to the individual in a dramatic way. So we start with antisocial personality disorder. This is what we formerly knew as the sociopath, and the acronym we're going to use for this is CORRUPT. Don't get confused. Antisocial is not the same as schizoid. I know we talked about that in schizoid, but these people just have no regard for our social norms. And that's why they're antisocial. They don't believe in society. They care only about themselves. So starting with our acronym CORRUPT, we have conformity to the law is lacking. They have no respect for rules. They make their own rules. They feel like they're above the law. O stands for obligations ignored. These people tend to take the perspective that they are victims, that people have wronged them, that society has wronged them, and so they feel like everyone owes them something. There is a reckless disregard for safety for their own and others. So there's a lot of risk-taking behaviors, and they don't really care what happens to other people. They don't care who they hurt. Remorse is lacking. In fact, the hallmark of this, no matter what happens, they could shoot somebody, they could run somebody over in a car, get in a drunk driving accident. It's never their fault. It is always someone else's fault. They have no guilt. They, again, feel that they are above the normal rules that the rest of us follow. There is a lot of underhanded, manipulative, exploitative behavior. In fact, the antisocial personality often looks charming or gracious when they're trying to get what they want. When they don't get what they want, when it's clear that they're not going to get what they want, they can get very nasty. So they are underhanded. They generally don't come right out and ask for anything because they're afraid they're not going to get it. They always feel like they have to take it. Planning is insufficient. Everything is here and now. It's always now, and it's always what they want. Everything is driven by impulse. And so they have poor planning. This is why a lot of criminals end up getting caught. And even though they generally don't tend to take responsibility for it, the long-term planning, they don't think ahead. They have explosive tempers. So that's the rest of the acronym. And that is what we know about antisocial personality disorder. Where you are likely to see this in the hospital is people who have been incarcerated. A lot of times will try to get out of jail or prison. It's an unpleasant place, and they'll try to get themselves into a hospital. So they might fake an illness, or they might sort of do something to give themselves some symptoms so that they can get out, and they feel that there are more sympathetic people outside the prison system. You might also see them referred as a result of the court system for evaluation in the psych setting. But these are your antisocial personality disorders. Very often there is substance abuse, and that is sort of goes with that reckless disregard for safety. Everything is about feeling good, and everyone owes them a living. And then we move on to borderline personality disorders, and these are people you will probably encounter in the hospital, particularly if they have self-injurious behaviors. They may be admitted to the psych unit and end up with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder after a careful evaluation. And these are very unstable, emotional people. Typically more women than men, and typically younger women. And, people can sort of grow out of some of these personality disorders. Borderline tends to mellow with age, whereas your obsessive compulsive personality disorder tends to get worse. But borderline, you usually think of younger women. Very intense, chaotic type relationships, very impulsive behavior, very emotionally erratic, unstable people. So the acronym we use for that is AM suicide, and the reason the word suicide is in there, you can see self-injurious behavior or suicidal gestures or suicide attempts, particularly if they have a fear of abandonment and relationship issues start to aggravate their personality disorder. So there is a fear of abandonment, and often these people were abandoned in childhood, or they experienced some sort of rejection, and that sort of drives some of their behavior. And so they have this sort of go away, come back here, don't leave me kind of behavior. There's mood instability. Now, what sets this apart from, say, a bipolar disorder, and sometimes you'll get people who are diagnosed with one or the other, or both at the same time. The mood instability with borderline personality disorder, rather than where we get manic phases that last 4 days or several weeks with a bipolar disorder. This is very reactionary. A person can have moods all day long. You say one little thing to them and it triggers something. Whereas a bipolar disorder, a lot of times there's no real trigger, no discernible event, except for a general overall stress that can put people into a mood dysfunction, such as a depressive state or a manic state. With borderline personality disorder, you'll get mood instability pretty much constantly, and there are usually precipitating triggers. And they're very chaotic people, and they can be very exhausting to deal with. You have suicidal behaviors or self-mutilating behaviors, cutters. And this is like sort of an attempt to sometimes externalize when you have the cutters or the self-injuring people. They feel numb, they're depersonalized, and so they hurt themselves to sort of feel something. But unstable and intense relationships is another characteristic. They tend to really almost instigate a lot of conflict in their relationships. Then we have impulsivity. These people will do things on an impulse, and so you see a lot of risk-taking behaviors, a lot of promiscuity, just a lot of impulsive behaviors. C is for control of anger, really control of all emotions lacking in this individual. They cannot control their emotional expression or their emotional response. The I is for identity disturbance. Borderline personality disorder tends to lack a clear sense of identity, and that's one of the other things that drives this disorder. They have a lot of ambivalence about who they are and what they want, a lot of identity disturbance, also why it tends to temper with age. D is for dissociative symptoms. Sometimes after all of this intense emotional behavior, they sort of almost detach and dissociate and get almost a flatter affect. And they tend not to connect their behavior with the consequences. There is a sense of emptiness. Sometimes these people will get very, very bored very quickly. And that is your borderline personality disorder. And the biggest thing with the borderline personality disorder that's not in our acronym is that they tend to split. They split people into two camps. You're the good one, you're the bad one. These are people I like, people I don't like. And they will put you into a camp relatively quickly and be ready to put you, the first time that you do something that they don't like, they are very quick to categorize you as one of the bad people in their lives, the people that, the negative people in their lives. There's a lot of splitting, and there is also sometimes they will play one person against the other, try to get people on their side against the people that they think are their enemies. So that's your borderline personality disorder. Very difficult and challenging to deal with for people around them. Okay, and next we go on to the histrionic personality disorder, and I'm sure we all know people like this. I'm sure you can look at reality TV and find tons of histrionic and narcissistic personality disorder people. The acronym that we use for this is Praise Me, and the behavior that characterizes a histrionic personality disorder is that they need to be the center of attention. They crave it. These are your drama queens. People will accuse the borderline personality disorder of being a drama queen. The difference is the borderline personality disorder isn't necessarily trying to call attention to themselves. They just have all of these intense emotions that they can't moderate. Histrionic personality has very shallow emotions, but they make a big deal out of them in front of other people. And so we use the acronym Praise Me. And the P in this case stands for provocative or seductive behavior. And these are the people who will walk around, they're trying to seduce everyone. They need that attention from potential partners. They will wear seductive clothing, very low cut, very tight, in inappropriate situations, and they will make innuendos and comments that can make other people uncomfortable sometimes. And they do tend to be a little bit promiscuous. R is for relationships that are perceived as more intimate than they are. They think everybody's their best, closest personal friend. And they will sort of name drop people to get attention. Really, because they're so shallow and because they're so self-focused, their relationships never deepen. And because they need attention from so many people, they tend not to form strong, deep relationships. A is for attention. These people are very uncomfortable if they are not the center of attention, and you will see this if you go anywhere. This person is maybe not the center of attention. They're at someone else's wedding, or they're at a party where someone else is being praised. They will do something to call attention to themselves, and very often they have alienating behaviors associated with that. But they need to be seen and they need to be admired. So they need that attention. They are influenced easily. Because they need the attention of other people, they tend to pick up on cues very easily and sort of pander to what other people they think that other people want. They're usually very colorful people. So you'll get this style of speech that's very exaggerated and colorful. They'll coin little phrases. Everything is over the top. Everything's exaggerated. E stands for emotions, which are shallow. And you'll see these people like to put on a show of their emotions for the benefit of others. M is for made up, and that stands for their appearance. They like to wear a lot of makeup. They like to wear a lot of suggestive clothing. These are your fashionistas, people in their 6-inch heels. Again, they're dressing to call attention to themselves. That's the primary purpose. Emotions are exaggerated, but they tend to get over things pretty quickly in terms of that. Sorry, I'm just trying to shrink things so that they're a little more visible. But that is your histrionic personality disorder. And as I said, if you kind of look around your life and you look around popular culture, you're going to find a lot of histrionic personality disorder. It's out there. Okay, continuing through the cluster B personality disorders, we move to narcissistic personality disorder. And you can see my little picture here. According to the narcissist, the world really is all about them. So, you know, if I'm a narcissist, I'm at the center of the universe. Then there's my stuff. Then there's stuff about me. And there's stuff I hate. And then all the way out in the orbit are the other people who also revolve around me. And anything outside of that is really nothing. And so that sums up the worldview of the narcissist. They are unlikely to seek help for this. They don't understand why people disappoint them because they are special, and that is our acronym. The first letter in special is S, and that we're just going to say they are special. They are unique. They have there's something about them that no one else possesses. Everyone else is just there to serve them. They are preoccupied with fantasies. And their fantasies tend to take on the grandiose character of having unlimited wealth, power, beauty, other people sort of admiring and worshiping them. The E, there's really 3 E's. They can be envious of others. Anytime they're confronted with the reality that the world is not in fact about them, they get incredibly envious and competitive. They feel entitled. They need special treatment. They don't care that the rules are the rules. They deserve some special entitlement. They should be exempt from all of that. Unlike the antisocial personality who sort of feels like, yeah, rules are for suckers. They feel like, well, yeah, rules are good. It's just, I'm above that. I'm more important. I am superior. And they feel that they are entitled to excessive admiration. They can get kind of nasty when they don't get it. C is for conceited. These people will brag. They have no qualms about telling you how superior they are and how superior their stuff is and how superior their life is to yours, and how they're inferior in every way. Then we have interpersonal exploitation. These people will manipulate other people for their own gain, a little similar to the antisocial. Better planning, and really, they still believe in, following the rules, if only to avoid punishment, even though they feel that they're special. But they will manipulate other people to get what they feel they deserve. Arrogance. They just have a way about them, the way that they speak, the way that they deal with others. Very arrogant. Again, they're superior and they have no problem letting you know it. They lack empathy. So there are a lot of similarities to antisocial personality disorder with your narcissistic personality disorder. They may feel some guilt or blame. They might feel bad, but that's a very shallow feeling compared to the feelings that they think distinguish them as unique and powerful individuals. We all probably know a few narcissists. If you don't, look around a little bit more carefully. A lot of people who feel very, very entitled. And so that's a narcissistic personality disorder. Cluster C personality disorders, also known as the worried personality disorders, include avoidant personality disorder. And avoidant personality disorder shares a lot of traits in common with social anxiety disorder. It's an extreme variant where the social anxiety becomes so pervasive it colors everything about this person. The acronym we're going to use for it is CRINGES, and that'll give you a good sense. Again, don't memorize these acronyms. It isn't important that you memorize them. Just get a feel or a flavor for what characterizes these different types of personality disorders. So C in CRINGES stands for certainty of being liked required before they'll open up. They will not interact with people if they are not sure that they are going to be liked. They have a severe anxiety or fear that they will be rejected. And so the R stands for rejection or criticism, preoccupies their thoughts. They just have a pervasive worldview that they're going to be, this is a belief about themselves, that they're going to be rejected by other people or call negative attention to themselves. Intimate relationships, even their most intimate relationships, are characterized by restraint. They're afraid that if people know the real them, they're never going to be loved. And so even with the people in their own families, a lot of times they will not open up and share willingly. N stands for new. Interpersonal relationships are extremely inhibited. And that only makes sense. If you're going to be shy with the people who are closest to you, your new friendships or your new relationships are going to be extremely inhibited. There's going to be a real reluctance to open up and share with new people. So it does become harder to make closer friends, even though that might be extremely desired by the person with avoidant personality disorder. This person will do anything. They have elaborate defense mechanisms to get around, let me qualify that, social activity. This is something they've put a lot of thought and a lot of energy into, and they have a lot of experience in it. They know how to get out of doing things that are social because they are so uncomfortable being forced to do it. These people embarrassed easily. Any little threat to their self-esteem, as low as it is, gets them just mortified. And we have a self-image where the person is viewed, as inept or inferior. So there's like a real severe chronic low self-esteem with the avoidant personality disorder. Again, a lot like your social anxiety disorder. Different though from your schizoid personality disorder. These people want friendships. They do like people. They're just, they don't feel that they're likable. And that is a persistent, pervasive belief. The person with social anxiety disorder might feel that they are afraid to speak in public, or that they're afraid to eat in public, or they're afraid to, be seen in public. Whereas a person with avoidant personality just feels pervasively that they are not likable, they are not desirable, that nobody will want them being around. It becomes like a persistent belief that colors their behavior. So that's avoidant personality disorder. Moving through cluster C, we're now on dependent personality disorder. And dependent personality disorder is something you might encounter in the healthcare setting, particularly when you see victims of domestic violence who will not leave. And sometimes this is because they are so afraid of being alone and of doing things for themselves that they have a learned helplessness about themselves, and they will not leave their abuser. Sometimes an antisocial personality who is abusive will find a dependent personality disorder person and exploit their weaknesses and make them a little bit more dependent. In terms of what helps us develop, you have an introverted temperament, maybe inborn, and you have parents who either at one extreme are extremely controlling and don't allow the person to make decisions, or parents who are negligent and create a deep insecurity in the person, according to your book. Okay, so our acronym is Reliant. And the R stands for reassurance needed for everything. These are people, it's almost a dead giveaway. You'll ask them a question, it could be their name, their date of birth, their social security number, and they look at the other person. They cannot answer a question. They cannot make a choice without somebody reassuring them that that choice is okay. Expressing disagreement is very difficult. And this goes beyond cultural norms. In some cultures, expressing disagreement is taboo, and so people will find ways around it. But that's sort of more of a pervasive throughout the culture. This is an individual who cannot confront any kind of, or can't tolerate any kind of confrontation, who is so afraid to rock the boat that they will agree with things that they know are wrong. You can tell them the sky is green and they'll nod their heads and smile because they don't want to disagree with you. L is for life responsibilities delegated to other people. And this is because they don't feel competent to handle them. They might be very intelligent. They might be able to do any number of things, but because they think they're going to screw it up, they let other people do it. They will let other people make their healthcare decisions when they are perfectly willing and able, and they will tolerate consequences that are less than ideal because they do not want the responsibility of making a decision that might be wrong. They need other people to do this for them. Initiating projects is difficult. And that makes sense too. If you don't have any confidence at all in your own ability to act autonomously, you're going to want somebody else to take the lead, and then you can maybe follow through with a lot of guidance and direction, but you can't initiate. That would require you to step out of your comfort zone and be autonomous, which these people cannot do. When they're alone, there's your A, feel uncomfortable, and they can actually get almost panicky. They cannot be alone. They cannot tolerate living alone. So, nurturance is our N. They will go to extreme lengths, to get nurturance and support. Really, like almost a humiliating type of behavior. They will grovel to get somebody's nurturance, somebody to take care of them. They'll manipulate, but they cannot act for themselves. C stands for companionship, sought urgently after a loss. So these are the people. They may have, proclaim that they love their partner. 40 years they were married or they were together, and everything was about their partner. Their partner dies, and the very, next month they're with someone else. Or they experience a breakup, they're with someone else. They go from, if they're, in abusive relationships and they do happen to leave, or something happens where they're separated from that person, they'll very often go into another abusive relationship. But as soon as they're left alone for even a little while, they'll go and find somebody else. They have an exaggerated fear. Oops, sorry, that is of fending for themselves, or being left to care for self. They really feel like, oh my God, I won't be able to balance a checkbook. I won't be able to drive myself to work. I won't be able to get myself to the doctors. They are really, really frightened that they're not going to be able to take care of themselves. And if no one's there to do it, they'll be left stranded. So that's your dependent personality disorder. And next we have our obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and you'll remember that I talked to you guys about not confusing it with OCD. There are traits in common, but an obsessive compulsive personality disorder is somebody whose rigidity is sort of built into them. It is hardwired. They're perfectionistic. They may have lived with harsh criticism. They may have very low self-esteem, and that could be contributory. Our mnemonic for the obsessive compulsive personality individual is going to be law firms. They are very legalistic and they are very work-oriented and very serious. The L in this mnemonic is going to stand for loses the point of the activity. And an example of this could be somebody who schedules a big vacation for the family, and the family gets on vacation and they have to schedule every minute so nobody actually relaxes. Okay? So they're so caught up in the details and their lists and their schedules and their rules that they sort of lose the point of the activity. A stands for is the ability, to complete tasks is hindered. Because these people are so perfectionistic that they will do things over and over and over and over until they get them right. And so they might spend, hours and hours doing it. They don't maybe have the compulsion to keep checking, but they will notice when things are wrong, and they will try and do them over until they get them perfect, which ends up with them getting actually less done than they could. Worthless objects, they are unable to discard them even if they don't have sentimental value because they're still good. I don't want to throw those away. I might have a use for them someday. Friendships and leisure activities are excluded because they're considered frivolous and a waste of time, and they take up time that you could be spending working. The I stands for inflexible, and that is really the key characteristic. These people are rigid in their thinking. Over conscientiousness. Oh, how do I spell that? Now I'm going to have a little OCPD. They are very strict on ethics and values and morality, not accounted for by their religion or culture. You will have people who are, let's say evangelical Christians, and they interpret the Bible in a very particular manner that is not open for interpretation. That is not the same thing as an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, who will look at somebody and really judge them and be critical because they don't match the rules. They are rules followers. R stands for reluctant to delegate because nobody else knows how to do it right. If you want something done, you do it yourself. M stands for miserly. They are stingy with praise, stingy with money, stingy with affection, miserly with self and others. Can't take a compliment. Always have to find fault. Stubbornness. Don't argue with this person. They are always right. So that's your obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and don't they sound like fun? I bet you know a couple of people just like this, and you probably know a couple of people who have some traits but not all of them. You have to consult what your book says about the DSM-5. You probably need about 4 of these traits to be considered for a diagnosis. So that's obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and that concludes the personality disorders. We'll move on to nursing process next. Okay, so when we talk about nursing diagnosis for patients with personality disorders, there are a few that kind of fit for everybody, because personality disorders really represent a maladaptive response to stress at an age where personality is developing, usually very early when children don't have very good coping mechanisms, and they're overwhelmed by stressors. Impaired social interaction and effective relationship definitely apply to all the different personality disorders, because the person has difficulty with relationship if they have rigid traits that disorder their lives. It can be very hard to interact with a patient who has a personality disorder. They don't have a lot of insight, generally speaking, into their difficulties. A lot of their behavior stems from distorted thinking that has been in place for so long that it is very difficult to convince them anything else. They do not adapt to other people. Other people always have to adapt to them. Obviously, that makes for a lot of problems with relationships and social interaction. Now, for specific personality disorders, again, we're going to go with things that you're more likely to see in the healthcare setting. Antisocial personality disorder, when you have somebody who is got these traits, your priority diagnosis is usually going to be a risk for other directed violence. Your priority is always going to be to keep yourself, your patient, and other people safe. So if this person has tendencies towards sexual, physical, or any other type of violence, you are definitely going to want to make a nursing plan that addresses that. Defensive coping is another nursing diagnosis that fits. The person really becomes aggressive in order to prevent. It's like a preemptive strike. They're going to hurt you before you hurt them. And because this person has no remorse, these things can be very sort of difficult to deal with. Chronic low self-esteem might be a little bit more difficult to see in a patient with antisocial personality disorder, but a lot of the behaviors do stem from childhood experiences where they were put down and maybe abused. And so out of that comes this low self-esteem, and they feel that they have to manipulate other people to get what they want. Ineffective health maintenance, obviously. Antisocial personality goes along with a lot of drug use, a lot of unsafe or risky behaviors, unsafe sexual behaviors. It can go with a violent lifestyle. A lot of gang members do have antisocial personality disorder. And so these people have a lot of health risks. Borderline personality disorder. Some of our priority nursing diagnosis is going to be a risk for self-mutilation, risk for suicide. Complicated grieving is in your book, and it's sort of a stretch for me because what they're saying is that the fear of abandonment drives a lot of the behaviors. So a lot of times they may have been left abandoned or experienced death of a parent at an early age. That certainly may be true. Complicated grieving might be a diagnosis you could see on a care plan. Disturbed personal identity, absolutely 100%. These people lack clear boundaries. They do not have a good sense of their own personal identity. That's why their relationships with other people tend to be chaotic and disorganized and volatile. Anxiety, absolutely. They have a lot of ambivalence, and these constant conflicting emotions do cause them a considerable amount of anxiety. So you're going to want to relieve that if you can. And chronic low self-esteem does drive a lot of these behaviors. At the heart of it, they feel unworthy. And so relationships are very difficult for them, and they do sort of react with some extreme mood swings. Avoidant personality disorder, obviously if you've got a person who has persistent beliefs about themselves that are negative, you're going to be dealing with chronic low self-esteem, and your nursing interventions are really going to target that low self-esteem to get that person to be able to socialize and have satisfactory relationships with other people. Dependent personality disorder, you're also dealing with chronic low self-esteem, and sometimes you're ineffective family coping, an ineffective relationship, certainly, particularly if this person is a victim of domestic violence, and in that case will probably add a risk for injury. You're going to see people who have impaired decision-making probably, so think about those things when you're making care plans. So here's where we start to talk about nursing interventions for the various personality disorders. And they're going to depend a little bit on the cluster and a little bit on the individual type. When we have paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal individuals, these are our weird diagnoses. We want to be very matter of fact, and we want to build trust slowly with these folks, particularly your paranoid personality disorders. And your schizoid too. They don't really necessarily want a lot of your contact. They don't want you to be overly friendly, so you have to come in and be sort of business as usual until you gain their trust. A therapeutic relationship with these people is going to require a prolonged orientation phase. You need to let them know exactly what you're doing and when you're doing it. Keep your promises with them. They might challenge you, the paranoid and the schizoid folks, about your competence and your nursing skills. Learn not to take these things personally, but do be able to speak to whatever it is you're doing. And if there's something you don't know, go and look it up. Don't try to, fake it in front of these people, because they probably have a very suspicious attitude towards healthcare workers in general. Schizoid people do not want a lot of chatter, so if you're getting the message from somebody, again, you're probably not going to have a diagnosis of schizoid personality disorder on your chart, but if they're sort of aloof and they don't seem to want much contact, give them their space and respect their need to have some alone time. With your schizotypal personality disorder, one of the things you're going to want to do is to decrease anxiety. You also might see that some of these folks turn to alternative and complementary medicine to the exclusion of traditional medicine or like effective treatments. And so you're going to want to open that conversation and maybe be a little bit open-minded to some of their ideas, no matter how odd they seem to you. Borderline now, see, when we get into these personality disorders, the wild ones, this is where your boundaries need to be very, very firm with people. And your rules need to be consistent, clear, and followed by everybody, particularly with your borderline personality disorders. Remember, we talked about splitting and staff splitting. These are the people who will divide the nurses into the ones that are good and the ones that are bad. And if one person follows the rules, but not everybody, let's say one person bends the visiting policy, but the other nurses don't, they're going to start splitting the staff into camps, and then they'll start dividing and conquering and playing you against each other. So watch out for your borderline personality disorders with that. Rules are rules. They have to be consistent, they have to be fair, and they have to be enforced. And that's how you deal with borderline or antisocial personality disorder. With the borderline personality disorder, you definitely want to contract for safety. You'll see this in the clinical setting. They'll talk about the safety contract. These are contracts that people make with you where they agree that they're not going to try to harm themselves and they're not going to try to kill themselves. An antisocial personality disorder needs to be aware of the rules, and they need to know the consequences for breaking those rules. They are in a sort of morality phase where if it gets them caught, it's a bad thing to do, and if it doesn't get them caught, then it's okay. They need to know that there are consequences, and those consequences need to be uniformly enforced every single time. That's how you deal with those folks. And you need to keep a very close eye on your antisocial personalities when they're dealing with other patients in particular, and other nurses, maybe new nurses, novice nurses. Make sure they know to keep their boundaries very firm. Now, your histrionic and narcissistic personality disorder are similar, but not exactly the same. Histrionic personality disorder is going to be very colorful. They're going to describe their symptoms in very dramatic language. Don't play in. Listen, nod your head, but be very businesslike. You don't have to give them extra sympathy. Just very matter of fact, very businesslike again. Be consistent, be clear, be firm. Communication has to be very clear with these people. There cannot be any ambiguity. They exploit it. Narcissistic personality disorder. These are the people that are on the bell all the time. Now, you might be on a very acute unit with very sick people, and they still want to be treated special. They want the VIP treatment. Doesn't matter that they're the same as anybody else. They're the ones that in the emergency room, while you're doing chest compressions on another patient, they're asking you where their pain medicine is or where their pillow is, or could you please get me a snack? That's a narcissist. And you really, again, need to have your firm boundaries with these folks. Now, your cluster C, your worried personality disorders. These are the people you really want to watch for stress relief and anxiety. Avoidant personality disorders, particularly if you are in a long-term kind of care setting, either the psych setting or even the long-term care setting.
You don't want people to be social, not in the sense of an antisocial personality disorder, but you don't want to necessarily have people isolating themselves. So social isolation is another good nursing diagnosis for these folks. So you want to encourage socialization, and you want to build this person's confidence. Notice when they're doing something good and give positive feedback whenever you can. And obviously make notice when they try and venture out of their comfort zone and into the more social milieu. Dependent personality disorders, we're going to discourage dependence. We're going to help them through the decision-making process. Now, that may take some time, and it probably will take this person a considerable amount of individual psychotherapy to be able to make decisions and to feel self-efficacy at work. But you start with baby steps, and you get them used to making decisions maybe about their care. Would you like your pain medicine now or later? What would you like for lunch? Try and really get them to make as many decisions and act on their own behalf whenever possible. Give them the confidence that they need to perform those important life skills too, if you're working with them in the psychiatric milieu. And if they have been sort of conditioned into a learned helplessness by an abusive personality, you're going to have to convince them that there are some things they can do to keep themselves safe. There are things they can do to support themselves where they're not reliant on someone else. Obsessive compulsive personality disorders, very, very unlikely to seek your help because they know better than you every time. But if you can get this person to be a little less rigid, these are the people that you said my medicine would be here at 10 o'clock and it is 10:04. What kind of a place is this? What is the matter with you people? I've been waiting. Be very careful with the obsessive compulsive personality disorder in terms of making promises. You want to under promise and over deliver as often as possible. They are harsh and critical. Many times you'll find family members with the obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and they criticize the care that you're giving. It's sort of a stress induced mechanism whereby they think they're going to get better care for their loved one if they micromanage you. And so you maybe want to get this person on your side, and you maybe want to give them a range of times where things can happen, or a range of possibilities that could happen. You want to listen to their input, but at the same time, don't take personally all of the criticism and harsh sort of intervention that you might see on their behalf. So your book has some more nursing interventions especially for antisocial and borderline, which they consider their prototypes. But in general, it's important to have clear, consistent boundaries with all people, and it's important to communicate clearly and to respect patients if they have needs for privacy or for more explanation. And that really kind of concludes our unit on personality disorders. We'll meet on Monday and go over this in a little bit more detail. All right, thank you.